Bonjour, bonjour, everyone. Welcome to our event with Cara Black today. My name is Linda Witt. I'm the president of the Alliance Française Fédération USA. And we're going to be getting going here in just a moment while many of you get settled into the room. So Melissa, if you'll put up our housekeeping slide, we'll get going with that. So you are in the right place, everybody, if you're expecting to see Cara Black here today. And then we do have a couple of ground rules that we're going to ask you to follow. One is we're going to ask you to keep yourself on mute during most of the early part of the presentation. And we would suggest that you keep your option set to speaker and not gallery. That way you'll see the photos that Cara is going to be presenting via screen share with the help of Melissa Sora, our great tech helper in the background. And then we will be enabling the chat feature for the question and answer period. So if you think of things that you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and enter those into the chat. And then as far as our format today, what we're going to do is just have these very brief opening comments, and then Cara is going to speak for probably 25 or 30 minutes about her background, her work, and so forth. And then we'd like to have plenty of time for all of you to share your ideas, your feedback on her books, and to talk with her about her experience in Paris and the writing process. So it's my great honor to formally introduce our guest speaker today, Cara Black. Cara is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of 19 books in the Amy LeDuc Private Investigator series, which is, thankfully for us Francophiles, set in Paris. Cara has received multiple nominations for writing awards, and she has won a Washington Post World Book of the Year citation. Cara has also received the Médaille de la Ville de Paris, the Paris City Medal, which is awarded in recognition of contribution to international culture. She has been the guest of honor at conferences such as the Paris Polar Crime Festival and Left Coast Crime. With more than 400,000 books in print, we think it's fairly safe to say that Cara is a prodigious writer. And by the way, her work has been translated into 7 languages. Because of her connection with French, Cara has been touring Alliance Française chapters throughout the United States for many years. So many of you in the audience today, I think, have had a chance to meet Cara in person. Of course, today with the pandemic, she is coming to all of us today via Zoom from her home in San Francisco. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Cara.
Bonjour, everyone, and thank you so much, Linda. Wonderful introduction. And I've known Linda for years and visited the Alliance Française in Portland many, many times. And I just want to say, shout out to the Alliance Française around the country, around the world, because I'm a member, and it's a place where you can go and meet other, Francophiles, which I think we're all similarly addicted here. And it's a great place to see culture and, get books and films and conversation groups. And so I'm just so happy that I've been a small part of it. So I've been writing the Amy LeDuc investigation series set in Paris for about 20 years. And Amy is not done prowling the cobblestones of Paris. But for the past decade, I've had another story that I needed to tell, and I really couldn't wait. And just a little background on me, I'm really sort of obsessed with World War II. There were parts of my family who served, and but of course, American side. And so I sort of grew up hearing these stories. And it was when I started going to Paris, to France, to research the Amy LeDuc books, that I sort of came across the other part of World War II, of a country where my friends' fathers, grandfathers, uncles, great-grandparents had served both in World War I and World War II. Their country had been occupied. So it was a very different view I was getting, as opposed to my family. And it was just really, really fascinating. And I think my first book, Murder in the Marais, which maybe some of you have read, is kind of deals with that. It compelled me to write about my friend's mother, who was actually a hidden Jewish child during the German occupation in Paris. And it really propelled me to do a lot of research and to find out about that. And of course, I never intended to write a series. It was like I needed to tell that story. And then my editor said, well, where is Amy Leduc going next? And I said, excuse me? What about her dog and that man she met and, the detective agency and Renee? And I'm like, you are writing a series, aren't you? And I lied in this very little room where I lied and said, of course I am. So that's it. I started writing about Amy Leduc's adventures. And in the course of 20 years, going back to Paris and researching, again, my friends, family, people I met, there were always these little stories about World War II. There would be, I'd go to the prefecture de police to meet a contact. And, there are the bullet holes that are still on the wall from the fight at Libération. And so many things that's just part of history, it overlaid with, 17th century buildings. So I really always, this was so fascinating. So I have my little notebooks, where are they here, of kept free, things like this that I'd buy them in Paris and I'd start writing down my notes for Amy Leduc. But then I'd, hear this thing about World War II, and then it would be this other notebook, which, didn't fit in the Amy Leduc books, but it was too fascinating. Things I heard on the bus, in the cafe. So I have many, many of these, and I just kept them. And often in my stories, because they're set in the 90s, there is reference to World War II with the occupation, because a lot of files were coming to light. Jacques Chirac spoke about it the first time, and it was you couldn't write about the 90s in Paris unless you referred to the things people started talking about during the war. So, but there was always that other part. There were the parts that didn't fit in the books, and I think it came to a part where I was, I don't know, I saw some article, and it had about Hitler's visit to Paris. And he came to Paris for 3 hours. 3. He left, he never returned. And it seemed very strange to me, because this was 2 weeks after the German occupation. And it was like, well, this is his whole, this is his city, a conquered city. Why didn't he have a big parade on the Champs-Élysées? Why wasn't there a big hoo-ha, about this? And then I started looking, which you too can look at on YouTube, the videos of this 3-hour tour in Paris. And it was just very, I don't know. I started saying, well, why didn't he stay? What was the hurry? Why did he have to get back to Berlin or wherever? And then I read a book, and it had a footnote that included Arno Breker, who was his sculptor, and Albert Speer, famous architect and head of his armaments, who both wrote memoirs, books after the war. They survived. And in their books, in their accounts, Albert Speer said that they were in Paris on June 28th. Now there's a photo of Hitler with Speer on one side and Breker on the other, and the Eiffel Tower behind him. So they were there. And then Arno Breker wrote, well, we were there the 23rd or the 24th. It was a Sunday morning, and Hitler had just signed the armistice the day before and came to Paris. And that was like 2 different dates. Both men were there. This was never recanted. And I was like, I'm not a historian, but that jumped out at me, like, how could this be? And why would Hitler go out, a week after the armistice? Why wouldn't he have gone in? Why would he only stay 3 hours? And if any of you know writers or are writers, it's that what if, and it's like, what if? What if something happened? Because in 1940, 2 weeks into the German occupation, no one knew what was really going to happen. Hitler had blitzkrieg through Poland, but France was a different kettle of fish, as they say. French people, are, and I'm saying this in the nicest way possible, a little volatile sometimes. They're, very passionate. They could have risen up in arms against Hitler. They could have, or one person could have. No one knows, right? It's an unknown. And what if that unknown happened to be that there was an attempt on his life? So, and voila, I became obsessed with that. And I started talking with my editor, and she said, that's really fascinating and you really are passionate about it. Why don't you start writing it? So she encouraged me. And I had a lot of the research done. But then, now that I had the green light, I could go down and I could go into a research rabbit hole. It was amazing, especially going to the Chateau de Vincennes and into the archives. It was just incredible. So there were all these kind of things I could find. And maybe we could get to the first slide, number 4, Melissa. So right here. And can everyone see that one? Do you see slide 4? Okay, this is what it looked like in 1940. I found this photo and several of the others you're going to see in black and white in the flea market in Paris. And on the other side is a date written 1940. Look at that. It's sort of like the pandemic, right? There's no one around. But here were people leaving Paris in the Exodus when the Germans marched into Paris. So you've got people fleeing. There's an exodus. They put things on their carts. Okay. And this is the time that it takes place in Paris, my story with Kate Reese. This 2 weeks was just sort of this time that no one really knew what was happening. If we look to the second picture, number 5, oh, look at the Champs-Élysées, right? Look at that. It's like now, because Paris is also under curfew. But this was 1940, and you can see the Arc de Triomphe down there. And this is what, Hitler would have seen in 1940. So, and here we have the next one at Place de l'Opéra. So there's the opera house. And we see the people coming out of the metro, right? Just like today, except we don't see those German soldiers like today, do we? So this is, amazing because there were so few photos taken during that time that we can see today. And I thought about that, and I thought about, look at that. People have to go to work. People need to, go to the shop. People need to go to the doctors. People still live. And here were the German soldiers who were in Paris, and Hitler had provided to them that this is like their R&R place, when they're, they can come for rest and relaxation. So they were there every day, all along, all the time, everywhere you go. And the next one, number 7, Place de la Madeleine, look at that. Beautiful day. You see the German soldiers, you see women, you see the summer clothes. And I'll just give you a little hint because you people are special. Your Alliance Française. Originally, I was going to have this spot. You can see the stairway there beyond the grilled gate going up into the church at Madeleine. Hitler went here to the Madeleine, and I had thought maybe my sniper would shoot him coming down those steps there from the Madeleine. So if any of you know it, behind is that sort of in front of the Madeleine, there's many wonderful shops. There's the Maille, I'm saying it right, Linda, Maille, M-A-I, the mustard, the famous mustard from Dijon. So that shop is right there. I've often gone to buy the Dijon mustard. And I realized that to get in sniper position, you would need to go through the back of the building where the Maille mustard shop is, and go into the building and up the stairs to the top of the, 8 floors. So to go up to the top end, I actually did, and got into a rooftop position overlooking, from, down on here. And And that was a consideration as a point, but I thought it was too busy. So that place, no. Can we go to the next slide? It ended up being in Montmartre. Now, this is a photo taken in 1940, and if you see in the back there, there is the Basilica Sacré-Cœur, and that is where Hitler went, and that is where the assassination attempt takes place. But I love this photo because it shows Montmartre, not the gussied up tourist Montmartre that we probably see today, but how it was for working class people. It used to be a very poor area, and women had to come out and get water from the street. You see the robinet right there. I mean, there was no piped in water, especially Montmartre, because it was very old. It had been a village. So there was no water going into those buildings. They would come out. And it was hard. It was, can you imagine doing that in winter? So I really wanted to bring that photo into it. And then we've got the next photo with a woman. I love this because when I first went to Paris, you see the little message, you have to put a jeton, a token, in a payphone. I always used to have to go to the bar, the cafe, buy the jeton and go downstairs and make the phone call from the public phone because people didn't have phone way before cell phones. So this is a woman during wartime, I think using a candle to see because, electricity was very regulated. And then because it's not all doom and gloom, we have the last photo. This was from Libération, okay, Happy Days, 1944, where we have a policeman kissing a woman. And, there were happy times as well. And this, the war did end. But so that's kind of the background and I used. But I'd like to talk about my character, who is Kate Reese. She's an American. And after having written, 19, 20 books of Aimé Leduc, who was taller and thinner than I was, and much more chic and tousled, and effortless, stylish. And I wanted a big boned American gal, more like me, who would be stuck in a very difficult situation, who would have to use her gumption, her wits, her resilience to get her way out. And what kind of woman would she be in the 1930s? Well, my mother grew up during the Depression and often talked about what it was like. And I thought, okay, and I wanted someone who had gone through something. And then I thought, what would she really be like? She could be like a farm girl. Well, I thought she'd come from Wyoming, but I have never been to Wyoming, so that wasn't working. But I had been on book tour in Oregon often, had a good friend. And my friend in Oregon who worked for the Historical Society said, there are many women here who are descendants of the pioneer women, the frontier women who came over on the wagon trains, right, to settle the West Coast. And a lot of families come from them and they still have ranches or big farms. And so I got to hear some historical accounts, they recorded and about what it was like. So I thought, my American gal would have 5 brothers, because growing up with 5 brothers, you have to be tough, okay? That's a given. And she would have grown up on a ranch during the Depression in Oregon. But her father, like a friend of mine, her father was an itinerant ranch foreman. He didn't even have a steady job because it was the Depression. He had to roam. And so she would grow up on these ranches and farms, and she would learn to shoot as soon as she could hold a rifle, because it was not only to protect the ranch, which there were wolves up in southern Oregon and northern California where there were still bounties put on them. She would need to, shoot food for dinner, and so she grew up doing this. And also, I heard stories about living on a ranch, especially during a snowstorm in Oregon in winter when you have all the cattle out in a field. And one woman, the fence broke and the cattle started getting loose in a snowstorm. Well, you can't say it's cold, I don't have snowshoes. You've got to get out there. You've got to corral the cattle, bring them in, because they're your livelihood. You have to fix the fence, and that's part of life, and I think thinking on your feet, being resilient, making do is a quality that she had. And I did a lot of research on spies and espionage, and that's they have to think on their feet, right, when they're in a foreign country. So that's where Kate came from, my detective. And I wanted her to be an every woman as well. She would, she's a mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife. And why would she do the mission that she ended up taking on? Why? Why would a woman volunteer and sign the Official Secrets Act in England, an adopted country? Why would she go and basically take on a suicide mission to kill Hitler, which is the mission she was given, because she had nothing else to live for. She had lost her husband and daughter in a German bombing. So that gave her the reason. So that's really where Kate came from. I'd like to read a little something. It's very short. It's all you need to know is that Kate has been recruited, because she's an excellent rifle shot, by a British man who's very mysterious. She doesn't really know what he does. And so she's been taken to a house in the countryside. She doesn't know where she is. And Stepney is her handler. Stepney cleared his throat to get her attention. "We have limited time, Mrs. Reese. Please listen closely and try to remember everything I say. If nothing else, please remember these letters, R-A-D-A. He gave her a half smile. "No, it's not the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, but that will help you remember. Burn the letters in your brain. Make them second nature. RADA. Read, assess, decide, act. This stands for read the situation, assess possible outcomes, decide on options, act on your decision. Can you repeat that?" She did. "You'll practice examples later. Think those letters RADA to yourself constantly, every moment of every hour, wherever you are, walking on the street, in the shop, boarding the metro. Any moment, a German soldier might stop and demand your papers. It's impossible to avoid them. So you need to be prepared. Always have a story ready, but be flexible according to the situation. Use your intuition, your instinct." Okay, so, and we just saw that photo, of everyday life in Paris with, German soldiers in the metro. So that's kind of the milieu that she is thrust into. German occupied Paris, 2 weeks into the occupation. Now, it's a very undocumented time, I have to say, because the newspapers had stopped printing. The government was in exile. It was a very different time. When I started researching, I became aware of certain declassified papers from the British archives in Kew, which are way outside of London. It's really a pain to get there personally. It's where the archives are. That Section D for destruction had been declassified. So that provided an incredible wealth of information. I also went in London, to the Imperial War Museum and also the Churchill War Rooms, I believe they're called, which is just underground in downtown London. And you go in and you see where the war was run underneath London. You've got the war rooms, you've got the map room, you've got the special melamine phones that Churchill could call Roosevelt to. You have the typewriters of the women who worked in the war room who had felt on them because Churchill didn't like to hear the clacking of the typewriters. I mean, these things are left as they were in 1944. It was just left, and now you can go visit them. It's really incredible. So I had a lot of that great information to use. And so I wanted to write this story. Spoiler alert, Hitler does not die, in case you didn't know. But so Kate has to get out of Paris. And I probably talked quite a bit there. I don't know, maybe you have some comments or questions, or Linda does.
Okay, Cara, yes, we do have some questions. Let me encourage the audience to go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Anything you'd like to ask Cara, we can put in the chat and we'll sift through those. I do have a few other questions to start off with. This being your first standalone thriller, 3 Hours in Paris, would you say that you found it easy or difficult?
It was a real challenge. It was a real challenge because I am so familiar with Amy Leduc, my detective in the other series. And I have to say, when I started writing this book, I felt a little bit like I was being unfaithful to Amy, you know, having an affair. Sort of. But my editor said, "Oh, Amy won't mind, and you're going back to her anyway, so don't worry." And it was okay. And again, it was fun because this was a very different story. We were thrust back in the past, and it was a way to be again with a different character. And Murder on the Quay, one of Amy's books, it's a prequel. It was written when Amy was a student, and we see how she becomes a detective and meet her grandfather, who we've never met before. And some of those parts of the book go back to 1942. So it was my first toe in the water, so to speak, of setting part of a story back during that time. And that story was also based on a real event. My friend's father lived in a village in the Loire Valley, not where the chateaus are, but further away. And it was in a village that was on the demarcation line with the river of occupied France and Vichy France. So.
Great, thank you. Another question we have from Kathy Martin O'Kane. How did you come up with a plot for your prequel to the Amy Leduc series, Murder on the Quay?
Good question. Well, it came up with the idea because my friend's father, Jacques, who sadly isn't with us now, I went to visit with my friend. She's actually my neighbor in San Francisco. We went to stay with her family, her father, Jacques, in the countryside. They also have a place in Paris. And it was this town called Chabris, this village, actually, right on the river, and the Cher River. And so my son was very little then. And I remember we were going to the market, and we put my son and my neighbor's kids in the car seats. And he started telling me about growing up here during the war, because his mother was the village school teacher, and talking about how his classmates used to have to come across the river on the bridge to go to school, you know, with their special laissez-passer, you know, just to go to school. And then, of course, that changed. And then he once took me down to the river and showed me where he used to go fishing as a child, and said, this is where I came down one day to go fishing with the men of the village, and there was a body here, one of the villagers that had been shot. And then I ran, they told me, run away and don't tell anyone. And I went, you're kidding. You said I was like 10 years old. And he told me how everyone in the village kept this quiet. And we never knew whether, or as a child, maybe the adults knew why he was killed, what happened. Was it black market? Was he an informer? Was he a collaborator? We never knew, right? Anyway, he said he never did. So just one more quick thing. He started telling me about this. And then we went to the village market, again with children. And we'd gone to the village, we brought the car, we loaded up on vegetables to cook. We put the vegetables in the trunk. We strapped the kids in the car seat. And he said, did you see all those men that were in front of the cafe and some were drinking? And I said, oh yeah, it was like all the village men. He goes, one of the men who killed that man was there. And then I said, what? And then he said, well, I can't talk anymore because one of the kids was hungry and we had to get home. And he never told me who this was. So I thought it was fascinating that later in life, he found out, or everyone in the village knew who this man was and what really happened. And I thought about this, what is it like to live in a small village in an occupied country, all your life hemmed in by secrets? And how does that eat at the soul? It didn't, he was a child. He had nothing to do with it. So I really wanted to explore that. But thank you for asking, because I love what real life can just throw up, these nuggets.
Yeah, we've got some really great questions for you. From Ann Pedersen, she would like to know, was much of your research done in French other than the research in London?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of it was in French. And, I bring my iPhone, but I had a little tape recorder. I always record if it's, if they give me permission, because I always say, my French isn't that great and I really want to understand. And if you don't mind, and I get their permission, or I take notes. But again, taking notes is distracting. I'm trying to think and listen and do everything. So if they allow me, I like to record so I can play it back. I can ask my friend, that mean, so I can have that. Or also in the archives, it's all in French. So, I have to work through that. So yeah, people will only speak to me in French too, many times. One time, my friend and I, who's Irish, lives in Paris, and we were at the beautiful Irish Cultural Institute. If any of you know it, it's in the Latin Quarter. Oh, they always have vernissage and many lots of cultural events going on. But we were there for, I don't know, I went with her for some vernissage, and we heard this older woman and man talking, of course, and overhearing. I can't help it. And the woman was saying, "Oh, all in French. Oh, don't you remember during the war the blue lights? Oh, it was always the blue lights." And I'm like, "Whoa." So where everyone was drinking, so we kind of inched our way into their conversation. And I said, "Madam, where I couldn't help but overhear, what do you mean the blue lights?" She goes, "Oh yeah, during the war, all the street lights, all the, club were all blued with blue paint because it was curfew and they were afraid of bombing, because the British did bomb parts of Paris or outside of Paris. So they always had that." And she said, "What nobody ever talks about is that you were constantly tripping and falling on the curbs. And we had black and blue legs all during the war because we couldn't see at night. You just got the last metro home and you're running and it's dark and you fall, right? People constantly have black and blue legs." She said, "But no one talks about that." And I thought that's an amazing, really, thing that people don't mention. And now it makes me think here during the pandemic, what are we going to remember in 4 or 5 years about living during the pandemic? What little things we kind of want to get away from it as well. But there's small details of life that are just so amazing and can bring a scene to life too.
Great, and we're going to bounce all over the place here. We have a question that, let's see, it just popped off my screen. Let me move back to it. From Phyllis Perkins, she would like to know, is it important to read the Amy Leduc series of books in order?
It's a good question. I don't think so. But if you haven't read them, I'd suggest starting with the prequel, Murder on the Quay, because you meet Amy as a young woman. But a lot of people they ask me that and I say, "Well, what's your favorite part of Paris? Maybe I've killed someone there. Why don't you read that one?" Or, where if you're planning to go stay or your friend lives in, why don't you read about that area, and see Amy in action there. So they are all written to stand alone. So if you have not read any Amy Leduc, you can just pick it up and read it, because I can't, it's like when I read a series, you pick it up, you need to get the character, you need to be plunged into the story. And so I think we do that all the time.
Yeah. And then Nelson would like to know, when you're working on the Amy Leduc series, do you live in the arrondissement in the series while you are writing and doing the research? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you shift between San Francisco and Paris in non-pandemic times.
Sure. Oh, I see my friend Gail. Hi, Gail. How do I? Well, yes, I live in San Francisco, and I love San Francisco. So, and it's very French. A lot of people say. Someone said, "Oh, we're like the 21st arrondissement." I said, "Well, in our dreams," but yeah. And I have a child. He's moved out of the house. I have a dog. And when I go and do research, I'm very, very lucky to stay with a friend. And I can go twice a year. And I'm feeling really sad because I haven't been for a year now. I was there last year at this time. Who knew that I wouldn't get back to continue research. So I go and I stay with my friend. Again, I'm super lucky. And I stay where my friend lives, which happened to be in Belleville. My friend lived in Montmartre. I stayed in Saint-Germain with different friends. So I can't always stay in the arrondissement I'm writing about. But given that I am writing about the 13th, I was there every day. I was there in the morning. I was there at night. I was on the weekend. I wanted to get the pulse of this part of Paris, which is different, how the light hits. It's I just needed to be there on the cobblestones, And my husband said, yeah, is your writing going to suffer because you're not out in the cobblestones? And I go, I don't know. What can I do? But I think it's really important to be in Paris and to hear something, to go somewhere. I have often, I took a bus once. I was really tired and I just, my feet hurt. And I got on the bus. I didn't know where it was going, but it didn't matter. And it went somewhere and it was this whole different part of Paris. Maybe it was the 19th. And I watched this an older man and a young boy. I think it was his grandfather. And I watched them talking. They were in front of me. And I just noticed their interaction. It was really sweet. And then they were on the bus for a long time. And I just took notes. They later appeared in the book. So there's just this thing that Paris can be very inspiring about, And of course, cafes are cafes. But, the cafe in the 13th might have a different clientele than the one in the, 7th, of course, right? The 7th arrondissement, a little more shishi. But, there's always a plumber there at the counter too, And that's what I love about Paris, where you've got the mixture, which, gentrification is changing. But when I wrote about the Sentier, the second arrondissement, that's because I got lost. I was leaving the Marais. I was trying to catch a bus. I missed the bus. I just kept walking. And then I was in this area that used to be full of garment workers, right? It was the garment trade, the schmatas, and pushing the carts. And, it was just, where am I? Am I in the Lower East Side of New York, Parisian style? What was this? It was an area run by Sephardic Jewish people and all this wholesale garments. But it was like the Marais because it was run down. It was the 17th century building. So I started to write about the Sentier. Now they've all been kicked out. And now you've got all these trendy, branché restaurants, and I hope they continue. But it's changed a lot. But Murder in the Sentier, my third book, was really it's about a lost time. I can't believe it. In 20 years, that area has changed, Paris changes, as everywhere, as where I live, San Francisco.
Have you run out of arrondissements? Are you starting to cycle back to an arrondissement that you've already done? Where do you stand on that?
I have one left.
Okay.
And because I made a mistake. Someone was telling me, so you write 20 books, 20 arrondissements, you're finished. And she goes, but that's not true because you set 2 in one arrondissement. I went, oh no, I didn't know. And so she goes, now you have to write 21. And I go, I guess I do. Yeah. So right now I am finishing the edits this morning. I'm working all weekend, due Monday, are the edits on my next book, Amy's next book, set in the 15th arrondissement, huge arrondissement. And it took me a while to feel comfortable about writing about it until I found this story amazing. And so we don't have a title though. So if anybody has a great title, because all the names, it's not a touristy area, right? Many of you know it. You can see the Eiffel Tower from many places, but it's not, it borders the 7th arrondissement. And so it's hard to pick a name that, at first I was thinking Murder at Vaugirard, Rue de Vaugirard, but a lot of people don't know that, or they can't pronounce it. Or, so we're trying to play with different. So if you have any great titles for Murder in the 15th, not the 15th, but we are you have till Monday to get back to me.
Okay, great. We have a question that's
Murder
not about your,
down.
a question that's more about the writing process. someone would like in the audience would like to know if you find it important to use a subplot to play against the main plot, or do you focus mainly just on the main plot?
That's a good question. And, this is November, NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. So I hope, if any of you are working on something, you're keeping up your word count. First I start off with the area, why, what about this area is unique? What crime would happen here? What would be organic to this area? Not that crime can't happen anywhere. Murder in La Motte Piquet, I like that. And Amy goes to La Motte Piquet as well. But okay, so the wonderful market there. I love that market. Anyway, so it's about, first of all, what is this place? Second of all, why would Aimée Leduc be there? What is she doing here? Is there a personal tie? Is it a work tie? Is it, combination? Would she be familiar with this area? And she is, because she has to go and buy her horse meat from Ms. Davis, her dog there, because there's few horse butchers. So, anyway, why would she be familiar with? What is the general story? What is the focus at that time? And then I think about, of course, her personal life is usually more of a subplot, because she is a young woman. She now has a daughter, a baby, who's growing up. She has a love interest, but she's going to have attraction to bad boys. We've got Renee, her partner, the dwarf, who also is, oh boy, he's in trouble in the next book. I tell you, with the girlfriend. Anyway, I can't tell you about that, but he's, his life, their life is ongoing, and Morbier, her godfather, former policeman, a very problematic relation they had because he was her father's first colleague. So there's always, usually the subplot deals more with her personal issues, what she's dealing with at work. And then there's the major plot, which is the problem, which is the crime, which may be the murder, why she's involved. She's not a policewoman, she is a private detective. So those kind of.
And also a writing related question, Margaret Ann would like to know, do you write on a schedule, like every morning? What time of day do you do most of your writing?
Right. I write in the morning, and I write every day. And I have to say, when I started writing more than 20 years ago, I had a young child. And so he hadn't even gotten into preschool. So I had to use my babysitting quota, to take a writing class, which I did at UC Berkeley, to grab a half an hour because I, also had a job. So, which is fine. That's I'm not unusual in that. So, and then when I read a story about Dame P.D. James, about how she was 40. She'd always wanted to write a book, but she had a job in London where she took a train every day. She had a husband who was disabled after World War II and stayed at home. She had raised children, and she had a full-time, she supported the family. So it was like when she turned 40, she said to herself, my birthday gift to myself is getting up 1 hour earlier and writing for an hour. And this was before you had a laptop you could write on the train, going into work or anything. So her present to herself, raising a family, a disabled husband, a full-time job, was to get up 1 hour earlier and write. And in 365 days, she had a novel. I mean, of course, she needed to refine it. So I thought, wow, well, maybe I could get up an hour earlier and have that beautiful 1 hour and just distilled time. And I tell you, sometimes I think I got more done then than I do now. But there was a finite, right? You work on a deadline. Okay. So over the years, I've changed a bit, depending on my son's schedule. If he got an after school sports, it was perfect. I had 2 hours. He was doing lacrosse. I could be in the bleachers. I could be writing on a yellow pad, before. So I just kind of adapted. But I do my best in the morning because I'm clear. And then I come back usually in the afternoon, and I reread, I rewrite, I propel myself further. And my goal is to write a scene. It doesn't matter how long or short, a scene every day. The scene can be, because the scene means you start somewhere, new information is learned, an action happens, and the end of the scene is things are different. That's my very loose umbrella.
Oh, that's great. Bobby D would like to know, Cara, how did you come up with the idea of Aimee's mother and their relationship?
Well, I thought Amy's mother is American, and she disappeared, left them when Amy was 8 years old, and her father was, a single father. And we explore a lot of that in Murder on the K. Yeah, actually, that's a great one where we actually see Amy's father and mother together. I can't tell you anything else but it takes place in 1989, the weekend the Berlin Wall fell, which was pretty momentous around everywhere in Europe, around the world. So her mother, I felt, I don't know. I think I was in a class once, and there was a woman, a paper making class, and we did a project after making paper, and the woman was talking about her project. It was beautiful, and everyone said, "What's your inspiration? Where you get this idea?" And she said, "Well, my parents were killed in a car crash when I was 8 years old, and now she was in her 30s, and this is sort of my catharsis." And I thought, wow, that's amazing. She said, because I felt growing up that it was my fault. I felt if I'd been a better child, if I'd listened to my parents, this wouldn't have, guilt, right? But only a child. This had nothing to do with her. She wasn't in the car or anything, but she carried this guilt all her life, even though. And I thought, well, what would, in many books, detectives kind of in the genre have wounds. Many of them are divorced. They're alcoholics. And I'm sorry, I was so tired of alcoholics. I was like, let's give her a wound that really would, that I, could relate to. You lose a parent at 8 years old, whether they abandon you, whether they're, you feel guilty for something, and that would stay with you all your life. So that's what I used, her mother. But her mother had this political belief, and things happened. And some women, I actually met a woman in a Paris cafe who turned to me once and said, some women are not meant to be mothers. And I looked at her, are you talking about me or what? But I was like, yeah, you are right. I couldn't believe this woman. So of course that went in that little notebook, and I used it for Amy's mother. Some women really are not meant to be mothers, and that's Amy's mother.
Wow.
More than you wanted to know.
And while you're talking about her family, let's see, Renee, Miles, etc., can you talk a little bit about them, and then also her Amy's interest in fashion?
Right. Miles Davis, Niels Davis.
Yes.
Well, he's much better behaved than my dog, because he's Parisian. But I really, really wanted her to have a dog. And in Murder on the K, we learned how that happens, so I can't say too much. But also that, many people in France love Miles Davis, right? So I mean, just kind of a religion. So I was just kind of, I thought she would, and she hears that song of his. So I thought that went for his name. Renee is, a computer hacker extraordinaire. He's secretly in love with Amy Leduc. Unrequited love, very sad. He's brilliant at what he does. And he came from many people, I'm sure some of you have heard this story. I used to be a preschool teacher in San Francisco, and we were on a hiring committee to hire a teacher. And all the applicants, had credentials and experience. And one of the applicants was a dwarf, a woman, vertically challenged. And I remember thinking that she was like just as tall as some of our 4-year-olds. That the work involved in preschool is, young kids, it's physical. You got to reach and lift and for a lot of reasons. And I also felt, and to my shame, that what if the children didn't listen to her? What if they, made fun of her for her size? And that's terrible, but I thought it, okay? Anyway, we all voted. We hired another candidate. Voila. About a month or two later, I went to our sister preschool that used to be down at the Embarcadero. I went early for a meeting because there was an art project going on, and I heard the teacher was really good, and I wanted to steal some ideas, as you do in preschool. And I get there, I sit down, and they're all at a very, low table. They all have their smocks on. They're all around the table. They're so engaged in the work, and they're putting the materials away. They're taking them, they're being so responsible. And I'm like, wow, where's the teacher? Where's the teacher? The teacher was the woman we didn't hire, who was at the table with them in a smock. And she was handling it perfectly. The children respected her. They were engaged. And I just thought, that's on me. That's on us, because I was looking at her disability, not her ability. And I feel ashamed, and I was wrong. And they learn so much more from having a teacher like that, than we could ever give them. And our kids really missed out. So I think Renee, who is a dwarf, is me assuaging my guilt through thinking that. But people always, pick on Renee. But Renee has a very hard time physically. People think he has full capacity. He does. And I think also Amy is so cruel to him sometimes because he can't even get up on that cafe stool, that bar stool, and she's like, oh, I'm just sorry, and a lot of things we forget, that a person with disabilities has. So especially in the next book, boy, it's so cruel with that bar stool. It was just, but there's everyday things that he has to think about, the weather, everything. Driving, that's why he likes to drive a lot instead of walking, because of his hip dysplasia. And I'm sorry, was there another part to that? Oh, about her fashion? Well, because I have a friend who who can go to a flea market, a Salvation Army, I don't know, find a clump of clothes on the street in Paris and pull out that Givenchy jacket. She has a gene that I do not possess. And that Givenchy jacket may have a little, need a little sewing, a little work, a little something, but it's gorgeous. And so I thought Amy would have that gene because I don't have it. So you can find those incredible fashion items and look for class, quality. She really, she'll find that Chanel jacket, and she'll put it together with other things, which I think French women, and I don't know, but the ones I know, they don't buy all this haute couture, but they'll buy a few really good pieces, expensive pieces that will last them. And they're classic and they mix and match. So Amy has that incredible skill, which I do not possess.
So a good question from Anarin is how much of the story and scenes do you have outlined before you start writing, and how much actively develops as you write?
I'm a plantser. So that's in between a plotter and going by the seat of your pants. So basically I start with the place in Paris and then I go from there. I have to know, again, I have the framework. Amy has a job, she has a family, she has to, earn money. And I go from there. I also use a crime or a murder that's happened, that did happen at that time. Of course, I change it fictionally. And I work from that, especially in the next book. It takes place, I'm sorry I'm talking about it a lot, but I'm working on the edits. It takes place in 2001, 3 months after 9/11 in this country. So I wanted to, explore what it was like in France after that, 9/11 and what happened in France, because things did happen in France that I was not even aware of, mom-wise. So I take a real event and I work it from there, but I don't really outline. I sort of know certain events or certain crimes that will happen, maybe a few scenes, but I don't work it out. I wish I could.
Oh, that's great. And a related question, Cara, is how long does it take you with active research, writing, editing, all the way through to publication?
Well,
that's a tough question, I imagine.
Yeah, publication can take longer. But writing, it's about 1 year and 3 months, writing and getting it to where my publisher maybe accepts it, final draft. Now, the book I'm finishing now, or finishing the edits on, project, which took me all year to write, and I started it last year when I had finished 3 Hours in Paris, will come out in November 21. So you never, it's kind of when they sort of push these, especially with the pandemic. So, but yeah, definitely a year and 3 months. But I'm always working on something when I'm writing the next one. I'm not, I was sort of working on 3 Hours in Paris when I was writing all my other Amy books. I sort of put it aside, and when I have a break, I work on it. So we're always working.
Okay, thank you. And we're almost getting to where we need to wrap up. So I thought we would end with this one question that I'm sure you've had before. You described how you don't have Amy's fashion gene, but how alike are you and Amy in other ways? Alike or different? Yeah.
Well, I think, Renee is always saying that Amy is tactless. So I probably sort of tend to go that way as well. I'm also afraid of heights. But I also, would never go on a roof with heels, which she does because she's Parisian. Okay. I do go everywhere that is in the book. As the same with Kate Reese, and you see the I don't know if you can see this, but in the map of the book, it's a real map. We designed it. It's from 1940. We made it as correct to 1940 as we could. And you see in this story where Kate goes and other people in the book go. And I went everywhere, as I do with Amy. I climb in the sewers. I go in the metro. I ride the bike. I take the train. I get a ride in a car. I take the bus. I walk everything out. So I feel that brings, I hope, a truth to the story. And I wouldn't want to write something if I hadn't been there or seen it or smelled it or touched it or heard it. Of course, I may have heard it 2 years ago, but I remember it. I don't know. She's kind of my alter ego, but probably more of Kate Reese, the kind of resilient person. I could identify with that. But Amy the Duke is also someone I can identify with as well.
Oh, that's great. And I wanted to share with you that you do have a couple of suggested titles for your next book from today's audience. One is Murder in La Motte Piquet, and then the other one is Murder in Beaugrenelle. So there you have two possible titles to consider.
I like that. I like that.
Well, I think we're just about out of time. Melissa, would you be able to take or could we ask everybody to take themselves off mute now, or can we allow them to take themselves off of mute and give some applause to Cara for having spent some time with her? Thank you very much to everybody for coming, and thank you to Cara.
Thank you for having me.
Merci.